Welcome to Tech for Good with Bethnal Green Ventures. My name's Paul Miller, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by Nicholas Betts, founder and CEO of ZERØTEC. Nicholas, great to have you with us here on Tech for Good.
Great to be here. Thank you very much.
Cool. Well, let's start with ZERØTEC. What does the company do, and why is that important?
hmm well, ZeroTech is a B2B software working in the fashion space, and we help our designers and manufacturers save money and carbon by helping them cut their fabric much more efficiently.
Great. So tell us a little bit more about how that works in practice for people who don't know the slightest bit about the fashion industry.
Yeah.
And tell us maybe a little bit about like how you know about this as well. We'll come on to you in
Uh-huh.
a bit more detail in the future in the next
Yep.
question.
So the process of making a garment starts with someone drawing a nice picture. They would then pass it to me, or the job I used to have, which is called a pattern cutter, and it's our job to make it into a reality. We have to make all the pieces fit, have to make it fit people of different sizes, and make it industry standard. And then once that's ready, we pass it along to a cutter, and their job is exactly what it says on the tin. So they have to stack all this fabric up on a huge table and then cut all these pieces out like a giant jigsaw puzzle. It sounds really simple, but is actually can be quite complicated, and it's really where, as a manufacturer or brand, you can waste a significant amount of potential in your design, sort of through cost, carbon intensity. So that's really where we target. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when sort of first talking to you and like understanding actually like just how complicated in some ways the maths around sort of how you fit garments onto because material comes in standard sizes, there's cutting machines and all those kinds of things they're programmable these days, aren't they? But even just sort of working out how to fit the different sizes on the same piece of material is almost like a job that is beyond human human abilities.
hmm Yeah. Well, that was. I think that was what I found really interesting about it, because once you delve into it, and fashion has this image of being glamorous and it is wasteful, but superfluous, creative, wonderful. And the reality is, once you get into it, it's just like building a car, in that you are dealing with very unsexy software, very unsexy processes. It's about money, it's about margins, and it requires quite a great deal of engineering. But the reality is, it's not making a building or making a car. You're making something for someone to wear. But the challenges are still there in terms of it's all about how do you utilize materials more effectively, and how can we shave X percent off of our waste, improve our performance, and so on. So, yeah,
Yeah, and say a little bit about the size of the industry as well, because I think everybody maybe has a feel for how big the auto industry is, but like how big is the fashion industry? How much money are we talking about?
if we take the waste element as a industry, it's supposedly due to hit about 1.1 trillion by the end of the decade, as an industry as a whole. But if we take just the waste that is produced at the cutting table, so this is sort of before it's got to the shelves even. That's a whole other issue. But just that initial manufacturing waste is worth $200 billion, or as a volume, it's enough to cover Austria every year. And put it in another context, it's about 1 million football pitches. So it's a vast amount of waste that we as consumers don't really hear about. We don't know
Mm.
about it. We're focusing on what happens when we throw away stuff. But the reality is there's so much more going on behind the
Mm.
scenes.
Yeah. Okay. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up, and what were you doing before you started ZeroTech? I mean, you've mentioned one of your jobs, but tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Watford in Hertfordshire, so I've lived in the UK all my life. Um, I, uh, I actually got into fashion originally because I wanted to do something that I thought would be different every single day. I get quite restless, I get bored quite easily. So I moved to London around 2016 to study fashion at London College of Fashion. And at the time was really in love with sort of the design, all the kind of things that most people think about fashion, you know, the glamour, the catwalk shows and all that sort of thing. But the reality quickly gets stripped away and it's an industry like any other. And then I moved into sustainability. Sort of, I was really interested in that from an ecological, environmental standpoint. And then moved into uh, specifically the point I meant, the term I used earlier, which is pattern cutting, making the garments, engineering the garments. It involves a little bit of maths. It's all about um, being specific, being exact, making everything perfect. And that really interested me. And then when I took that into industry, that was where it was apparent that there's just so much waste that's being produced. And that in itself was very interesting. So I my job became what's called a lay planner. So my job was to tell people in the factories how you were going to cut your fabric. So I would send them a huge plan. We'd print it out like a roll of wallpaper. It could be 8, 10 meters long sometimes. All those pieces are printed to scale like a huge template. And then I'd have to work out what's called the ratio. So if it's a big name client and they want sort of X amount of size 8s, X amount of size 10s, 12s, 14s, 16s, and all of that has to be organized in such a way that you get the right amount of garments out at the end. So it was really quite a brain teaser. I was doing that every day of the week. I loved the job, but it produced so much waste.
Mm.
Anywhere up to 15% in the worst case scenario. So about 15 centimeters on every meter was just cut off. It was stuff we couldn't utilize.
And was there a particular moment where you realized that I need to do something about this, or that you had the idea for what became Zerotech?
Yeah, it was more just idle curiosity, actually. So I really loved my job, which meant I was very good at it. And I also was a little too overzealous, I think, in terms of I would always get my work done. And then I might be sitting around sort of waiting for the next design to come through. So in that time, uh, I started to notice that the efficiency of the way we were cutting fabric was not ideal, but that wasn't because we weren't trying or we didn't care. It was simply the way the design process worked,
Hmm.
the speed in which you had to knock stuff out. It just wasn't really, we were doing the best we could. So I had a deck of post-it notes by the side of my screen. And as the dress would come through, I would redesign all the components of it perfectly within this post-it note. So it was a bit like, it was like a puzzle. And that was just fun for fun.
Yeah.
Uh, in a weird way, because I was still a designer. I was thinking like a designer. I just thought, I bet I can do this. There must be some way to do it. And that's how it began. I started developing the idea as kind of like a proof of concept, which was originally a clothing brand,
Yeah.
seeing like, okay, I've got this puzzle, this post-it note. How do I make it scalable in an industry that needs to fit small, medium, large, extra large, all that sort of all those things, all the different challenges of really getting into the detail. Sort of what if the black fabric is the width of the fabric is this much, but what if we make it in white and the width is this much? It's different. How are you going to just factor in all these very, very boring but extremely important things? And that's how it began. Really, that's how ZERØTEC started out as a
Yeah. And
on the
there
job.
was a part of the story where you created a your own sort of fashion line, wasn't there, in Zero London, and that was you experimenting with designs that completely minimized waste.
Yeah, that was sort of taking it the real extreme end of the scale. So I wanted to produce designs that really you could effectively take to the likes of H&M and Zara, that are sort of the biggest manufacturers you can think of, and say, well, look, if I can do it, then you guys definitely can do it. And
Yeah.
that was effectively what I wanted to prove, that there wasn't really a justifiable reason for you to refuse this, because there is this mindset in the industry,
Yeah.
particularly around this term that's called zero waste. That sort of, oh, it's not for us. Oh, it would require designs to be changed to extreme. It's not in our sort of design aesthetic, all these various things. And I set myself the task of systematically breaking down every single one of these problems, like sizing, colors, design variation, all these things and excuses that I used to hear, and trying to disprove them. That was quite successful, actually. And that was where the design, sort of like the material optimization thing began, because I was really just messing around trying to reduce waste. Um, but what, and it's really, it's sort of, when we talk about it, it's a very easy detail to miss, but there's sort of material waste, which we had eliminated, it was zero. But what I didn't intend to do was actually reduce the overall amount of fabric that you needed. And there's a very big distinguishable difference between that.
Mm.
So you're not only removing waste, so there's nothing going in the bin, but there's actually less fabric going into the factory. And that is a much more interesting idea, because that's something you could apply to all kinds of industries.
Mm.
Make the same amount of stuff with less material, less money. Who doesn't like the idea of that?
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And so you then built software that essentially automated your brain. Tell us a bit about like ZERØTEC, the platform now. Like what does that what's that able to do for your customers?
Yep. Well, it was developed really with me being the problem, the end user. So I worked with a dev team, and we started sort of mid 2023. We secured an Innovate UK grant to really be the starting catalyst. So we grew the team, brought the developers on board, and we just worked together to kind of digitize the processes that were going on in my head. So previously, I worked on the dining room table in my old student flat, um, and it was quite backbreaking because I was just leaning over a dining room table all day. But trying to make these processes work if someone else were to try and do
Mm.
it, that was really the challenge. So we began really just by introducing, now that I look back on it, really simple concepts like providing performance metrics live in real time. So the result is, if you're sort of drawing on the paper, if you like, you've got a little number, a little ticker saying X amount efficient. You make a change, the efficiency changes. And that had a really big impact we weren't expecting, because people that historically in the process had no responsibility for efficiency were proactively trying to improve the efficiency because they were interested. It was a game. So we kind of, I don't like to use the term, but it's gamifying effectively what we did, and it was completely accidental. And then the next step really was introducing AI, or specifically like machine learning, into the process of organizing the pieces to be cut. So again, a kind of misconception we've worked to kind of disprove is that the tech is as good as it needs to be. There isn't any better we can do. And maybe sort of over 5 years ago, that might have been true. But the reality is, with this emergence of everyone trying to adopt AI in different ways, there has just been this explosion of potential. So that's what we've utilized to reduce material wastage by up to 15%. So that, to a manufacturer, might not sound like a lot, but it's huge potential. Up
Mm.
to £1.70 and 2 kilos of carbon per garment. And putting that into context, it's 350 million to a manufacturer like H&M. So
Wow.
it just goes to show how much difference that can make.
Switching gear a little bit, what have you learned so far about building a company that's both impact led? Because obviously just listening to you, that you're really passionate about that environmental saving that you can create, but also that's commercial, because you know your numbers, what you're trying to do from a commercial perspective. What have you learned so far about that?
Um, the thing that I both love and hate, in equal measure, is actually the narrative building, the storytelling, particularly after raising, which was probably the greatest challenge I've ever had. Um, and that was really important in trying to understand the narrative and the difference, as you say, with an impact startup. I've always been so like really passionate about the sustainability element of what we're doing. I just hate waste. It's just, I guess, how
Yeah.
I was raised, really. It's just really not a virtuous thing to really aspire to. And the reality is that the industry in the world and the way money works is that sometimes people just don't care quite as much.
Oh,
So really trying to really discern that tightrope, and sort of it's absolutely the same whether you're talking to a customer, or an investor. It ultimately is the same problem, and normally the answer is almost the same as well. Actually, um, in terms of we work with some universities. Universities love to hear about how we support students with embedding sustainability in their studies. So we provide tech that just helps them be more sustainable. And that's a big goal for universities. Whereas brands, of course, it's all about margins
mm,
primarily. Because what good is sustainability if your business is shut down? So it's about balancing and leading with the right kind of selling point.
yeah,
The sustainable thing for me is a very positive extra that it really disproves this assumption that's existed for so long in fashion that sustainability means I have to pay more for fabric, and it's all about fabric. That's it's changing now, but even as recent as a year ago, you mentioned sustainability, and people say, "Oh, well, we use recycled polyester." It's like that's not the only thing you can do. There's so many more things. What about how you cut the polyester for a start? You could
mm,
use the dirtiest, most environmentally unfriendly polyester. But with us, at least we help you use less of it. So
mm,
that's another way of being a bit more sustainable. So trying to navigate that has been challenging, but
yeah.
that's certainly what I've enjoyed the most, having started to work it out now.
Yeah. And so, yeah, what do you enjoy most about like, running a tech for good startup? And I guess what's the bit, I mean, you've touched on fundraising already is like, it's been tough the last few years. Like, what do you like and what do you find more of a challenge?
Um, I think, yeah, definitely the thing that I like the most is actually the community that's coalesced around me and the company. That I've been very fortunate. Of course, I have I have BGV to thank for a lot of that, but I have made some amazing, friends for life, really.
Mm,
And I think prior to joining BGV, really, actually, was when I think it really started in February 24, I think now. Um, it's very lonely, my
mm,
experience. So I am a solo founder, effectively. And so there were always some things you can't talk about to your team.
yeah.
Um, and having people that I had met through BGV, actually founders that were in exactly the same situation, and everyone has a personal life on top of the work life, and
Mm,
trying to balance that all and I tried to talk to friends and family, and they just don't quite get it in the same way.
yeah.
So that was such a great comfort to then be able to meet and have great friends that you can call up at any time and talk about very work related stuff. But it is a great comfort. Um, Definitely the most enjoyable aspect. Challenging. Um, Challenging, really. It is the investment side. I
Mm,
feel like looking back on it, it's an enormous achievement for me personally in having got to where we have, having got the traction that we have. But uh, well, I don't take it for granted, I suppose, is
mm,
the thing. I'm aware that we're doing well now, and we need to continue doing well. It's a very changeable environment, so I suppose we're always thinking and positioning ourselves, I suppose, for that next stage,
yeah.
which for us would be seed, really.
Yeah. Cool. And for people listening who are sort of thinking about building their own tech for good business, what advice would you give them?
I think, apart from something that I haven't repeated, because otherwise I will be just repeating myself, because friends are definitely the first thing. But I suppose not being afraid to kind of abandon an idea when it's not working out.
Mm.
And that was really what my first. I, I kind of, in a way, personally at least, I kind of consider myself more than a first time founder because I've made a lot of mistakes, both financially, personally, in sort of wanting to start a brand
Mm.
originally. Then I discovered I hate retail. I hate retail. I hate the nature of it. I don't like B2C. I don't like working on social media. Like now, I don't touch our socials because there's just one of those things where I know someone else would do a better job than I would,
Yeah.
and that's very important, I guess, knowing your strengths. And then the most painful thing, which was painful at the time, and now I think it was one of the best decisions, was just being able to say, I don't think this is working. But I have this idea, which is about material optimization. Admittedly, I know nothing about software, but I know people that would help me. And
Yeah.
that was basically it. It is a cliche, but you do become like a generalist, um, where I'm now not faced with things that I don't understand because eventually you build an amazing network of investors, non-exec directors, and all these, these people with these big jargon titles. But ultimately, what they are friends that are looking out for you. So now, whenever I come to anything I don't know, I'm fortunate that I can call you, or a founder friend, advisors that I've made good friends with over the years from the likes of Innovate UK,
Well,
that can help you out of any situation.
that's great. Yeah. Where do you see the sort of the slightly different question, I guess, but a sort of fashion and sustainability world going in the future? I mean, it's such a sort of tumultuous world at the moment. It feels like, sustainability is sort of under the hammer from Trump or whatever it might be. What's your feeling at the moment around uh, those worlds of sustainability and fashion in the future?
Um, yeah,
Big question.
there's a
Sorry.
lot there. Well, I feel like it's moving in the right direction, and it's starting, I think, to move faster in the right
Yeah.
direction at last. We don't look to the US for direction where it comes to that. Fortunately, I think the UK is being dragged along with the EU in terms of being very environmentally forward thinking. It's not pretty, it's not fun because it's all regulation heavy. And yes, it does make business a bit more challenging, but I think these are changes that just need to happen. I think it's an opportunity for people that have good ideas, like in the fashion tech space, to really meet those businesses halfway. In providing innovation, there's so many opportunities there, and I think it it kind of really ties in quite nicely to something that I've really experienced over the past year, which we're working to try and do something about in our space, our community, is that there is actually there are so many incredible startups you've never heard of,
Mm.
um, because unfortunately the fashion world is suffering a bit of a kind of an inertia, really, of sorts. It's under a lot of pressure from all directions: sustainability, consumer confidence, margins, cost of living, um, all these pressures. And then on top of that, trade tariffs, supply chain disruption, all that. Brands are fighting for their lives. Um, Yet there are so many startups that have amazing ideas, and there is really kind of like a dropping off point, where I was in the room probably about like 200 startups last year, and the topics of conversation that were given to the groups were sort of around digital passport, sustainable materials, all these jargon heavy stuff.
Mm.
And I just put my hand up to the entire room and just said, does anyone want to talk about how hard it is to get money? And then suddenly everyone was like, yeah, I want to talk about that. And it's just a real problem of getting good ideas to execution.
Yeah.
And there's a problem there maybe with confidence of investors, but that is also informed by the confidence of consumers, and then brands having the resources to devote to pilots and then ultimately pay for
Oh,
the pilots that they're having. So it's something that we're trying to bring all those pieces together at the moment, um, to try and solve, because if we take the legislation and the direction, sort of trying to thread it back to your question, if we take like all this incoming legislation and the changing winds, the reality is a common buzzword that is used is digital passports. So basically,
yep.
your jumper, for instance, where the fabric came from, where the factory it was made from, were the workers treated ethically and responsibly? Is it responsibly run? All this regulation and things to make sure that no nothing was no one or nothing was taken advantage of
Yep.
to produce it. But the reality is, so many brands don't have a clue. They're not ready.
Mm.
We don't even know, the actual legislation for this digital passport hasn't actually been written yet, and everyone's frantically searching around, and others are saying, "Don't worry, we've got it. We can help you," but they can't say that because no one knows what the legislation is. So there does need to be a very quick gear change, I think, in how we get all these smart solutions into businesses, because the answers are already there.
Great. Well, Nicholas, thank you so much for joining us on Tech for Good. It's been a pleasure. If you're listening and you've got suggestions for future guests or topics we should cover, please do get in touch. And if you're working on your own Tech for Good venture and looking for some help with that, then do head on over to bethnalgreenventures.com to see how we might be able to help. That's it for this week. Thanks for listening and goodbye.